All right, so 3 things just to kind of wrap things up for women in the Overland Trail and using their words to tell you those stories. So one of the things that women often note in their diaries and in their letters is that they would sometimes find themselves taking over jobs that they wouldn't usually do. So going beyond those gender roles. So for instance, women noted like if the wagon gets stuck in the mud, like everybody's got to get out and move the wagon. If a husband gets sick, you know, the wagon still has to go with the rest of the wagons that day, so she ends up driving the wagon. But the reverse didn't happen very often. In that a man would take over the job that a woman usually did. So, for instance, one man wrote in his diary, it was the end of the day, he's sitting by the fire, he writes, after having kneaded her dough, she watched and nursed the fire and held an umbrella over the fire and her skillet with the greatest composure for near 2 hours and baked bread enough to give us a very plentiful supper. So think about this for a moment. She's out there in the rain with her umbrella, wearing a corset, all this stuff going on, rolling up the bread, baking the bread, got her umbrella, it's raining, and what's he doing? Just sitting there watching, writing about it. Now, to be fair, she also doesn't say to him, hey, hold my umbrella, right? So she's just as much part of those gender roles too, but a good example, right, of the ways in which this didn't often happen both ways. Now, another thing to think about is just how difficult this journey would have been. So you can also see this in women's diaries and in the letters too. Most of these women would have been pregnant or mothering young children, they've just given birth. And one woman wrote in her diary, there was a woman died in the train yesterday. She left 6 children, one of them only 2 days old. And then 3 days later, she writes, they had just buried the body of a woman who died days ago and were just digging a grave for another woman who was run over. She lived 24 hours. She gave birth to a child a short time before she died. So here is one woman's diary, and in the course of several days she noted the deaths of 3 women, a few of them having just given birth. You've got a story on the West that also is pretty difficult in terms of the things that people were up against. 2 things, just psychologically, these women are leaving behind that cult of domesticity in terms of the isolation and just how that would feel. One woman wrote in her diary, boxes and trunks of clothing were thrown out, chests of costly medicine, cooking utensils, cooking stoves, vessels of every description, tableware of every description, and in fact you can name nothing that was not lost on this road. And when I read that, I often think about again, mentally how this would have felt, like when women are leaving that called domesticity, and then as they're in this wagon, because as the wagons get further along, you just have to throw stuff out because the oxen are getting tired. You can't stop at America's Tire Company and get another wheel for your wagon or pick up some oxen, and so they would just throw things out. And I imagine what it would be like to see that just littered on the side of the road. You're literally, there's the called domesticity going right by you. And then also when they get there, what's there, right? I mean, they gotta make their house. They there's not those communities that they're used to. And so one woman wrote, I have been very blue, for I cannot make a friend like mother out of Henry. And this is usually when I tell you the story that Ann Richards tells about the chickens, but I'm going to let her tell it to you since we can use more video clips in this format. So that next video clip will be, again, talk a little bit more about this isolation and how that felt. All right. I hope you're doing well. Take care.